What would you do if you helped a neighbor without asking for anything? And the next day, a mysterious box showed up at your doorstep, one that would change your life forever. Walter Harper was 76 years old, retired, widowed, a quiet man who didn't ask for much, just a warm cup of coffee, his favorite chair by the window, and the occasional crossword puzzle. But what Walter lacked in words, he made up for in doing. And that's exactly why, when he heard the sound of hammering and frustrated sighs coming from next door, he stepped outside with his old toolbox in hand. Across the fence was Danny, the young single dad who'd just moved in with his daughter. His fence was falling apart. Half the slats were missing. The posts leaned like tired soldiers, and Danny was clearly in Vera's head. "Need a hand?" Walter asked, adjusting his cap. Danny looked up surprised. "Oh, Mr. Harper, no, I can't ask you to." Walter shook his head with a small grin. "Didn't ask, just offering." Together they worked through the afternoon. Danny's daughter, Emma, brought them lemonade and shy smiles. Walter showed Danny how to align the posts properly, how to secure the wood, with just the right pressure, things only years of experience could teach. By sunset, the fence looked like new. Danny stood back in awe. "I don't know what to say. You saved me a whole weekend, and probably a few splinters." Walter just nodded, wiped his brow and said, "Well, it's a good fence now. Should hold through a few storms." Danny insisted on paying, but Walter refused. "I didn't do it for money," he said simply. "That's what neighbors do." They shook hands. Walter walked back to his house. He didn't think much of it. Just another quiet act of kindness from a man who had lived his life by doing what's right, even when no one's looking. The next morning, Walter opened his front door to find something strange on his porch. A wooden box. No name, no note, no sender. Just a simple sanded box and a small carved symbol on top. He bent down, picked it up, and brought it inside. It wasn't locked, but for some reason Walter hesitated before opening it. And when he finally did, what he saw inside made his breath catch, not because of what it was, but because of who it was from. Walter stared at the contents of the box, his hand trembling just slightly. Inside, there was no gold, no money, no dramatic letter. Instead, there were old photographs, black and white, some yellowed at the edges. The first photo was of a small house that looked oddly familiar, until Walter realized it was his own house decades ago. Under the photo, someone had written, "Harper House, 1971. Still standing, still kind." The next photo showed a young couple sitting on the hood of a car. The man looked like a younger Walter, and the woman, his late wife, June. Walter felt his throat tighten. Beneath the photos was a small folded note. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat, and deliberate. It read, "You've fixed more than fences, Mr. Harper. You've repaired hearts. This is just the beginning." There was no signature, no clue who left it, just the same carved symbol. From the top of the box, a tiny heart with a wrench drawn through it. Walter leaned back in his chair, the weight of the note pressing on his chest, heavier than any tool he'd ever carried. He hadn't told anyone those stories. Not about June, not about the early days, not about what he lost when she passed. And yet, someone knew. He picked up the final item in the box, a thin book, hand-bound with the title burned into the cover, "Fixing Things: The Quiet Life of Walter Harper." He opened to the first page. There was a story, not a dramatic one, but a real one. It detailed the time he helped an elderly neighbor patch a roof in the middle of a storm. Another page described how he used to fix toys and bikes for neighborhood kids, never asking for thanks, just leaving them on porches at dawn, like little mechanical miracles. Walter turned page after page. Each story was a memory, his memory, but not written by him, written about him. He wasn't just surprised, he was stunned. Somehow someone had been collecting moments of his life that he had long forgotten or assumed no one ever noticed. The final page read, "This is not the end. It's the first chapter. Your story is being told because it matters." Walter sat there for a long while, sunlight drifting across the room. He hadn't felt important in a very long time. He hadn't felt seen, but this strange, beautiful box told him something he never expected to hear again. You made a difference. You mattered. Walter closed the book, carefully stood up, and walked to his back window. Across the fence, little Emma was playing with a toy truck, one he remembered fixing a month ago. And that's when he made a decision. If his life meant something to others, maybe it was time to share it. Walter Harper wasn't one to chase attention. He never liked being the center of anything. Not a stage, not a crowd, not even a photo. But that mysterious box changed something in him. It lit a quiet spark. That evening, Walter pulled out an old notebook from the drawer near the window. Its cover was worn, the edges curled. Inside were pages half filled with measurements, home repair tips, doodles, and grocery lists from years gone by. But now, for the first time in a long while, he picked up a pen with a purpose. At the top of the next blank page, he wrote in block letters, "Things I know that might help somebody someday." Underneath, he listed simple things: how to stop a door from creaking without replacing the hinge, how to patch drywall with leftover coffee grounds and glue, how to calm a scared kid by talking about anything but what's scary, how to say "I'm proud of you" without using those exact words. The list grew longer than he expected, and it made him realize something he'd spent decades collecting: quiet wisdom, and never once thought to pass it on. Until now. The next morning, he stood outside Danny's door. Danny opened it in his pajamas, surprised. "Mr. Harper, everything okay?" Walter smiled and held up the notebook. "Emma likes building things, right?" Danny nodded. "I was thinking," Walter said slowly, "maybe she and other kids around here might want to learn how to fix more than fences. I could teach them." In the garage, Danny blinked, caught off guard. "Like a workshop?" Walter shrugged. "More like a place to tinker, to learn, to build something with their hands, something they can be proud of." Danny grinned. "That sounds amazing." "I don't want it to be a big thing," Walter said quickly. "Just a few kids. Just Saturdays." Danny stepped out onto the porch. "I think a lot of parents would jump at the chance." That same afternoon, Clara, the friendly librarian, a few blocks over, showed up at Walter's door with a flyer she'd printed for him. At the top, it read, "Mr. Harper's Fix-It Saturdays. Learn to build, repair, and create. For ages 8 to 16. Tools provided. Stories optional." Walter laughed when he saw it. "I didn't ask for this much attention." Clara winked. "Too late. You've gone viral, old school style." The flyers spread faster than expected. By the end of the week, Walter had 6 kids signed up, 2 parents asking if they could help, and one very enthusiastic principal offering to donate supplies from the school's old storage closet. Walter's garage had never seen so much foot traffic or so much laughter. On the first Saturday, the kids filed in, nervous but curious. Emma led the way, proudly wearing a denim apron Walter had stitched himself. Walter stood at his workbench, heart beating like it hadn't in years. He looked out at the group, cleared his throat, and said, "All right. First lesson, don't be afraid to mess up. Most of the best things in life are built out of mistakes." And just like that, Mr. Harper's Fix-It Saturdays had begun. What Walter didn't know was that the box wasn't done yet, because later that evening, another one appeared, this time smaller, lighter, and this time with a name written clearly on top, Walter. Walter stared at the second box sitting on his porch. It was smaller than the first, about the size of a shoebox. This time, it wasn't blank. One word was written across the top, in neat handwritten print. Walter, he picked it up slowly, the wood cool and light in his hands. It wasn't heavy, but it felt important somehow. Inside, he found a folded letter on top of something wrapped in soft blue cloth. The letter had no name, just a greeting. Dear Mr. Harper, you don't know me, but when I was a boy, you fixed my bike. I had no father around. My mom worked 2 jobs, and I was getting in trouble a lot. That day, you didn't just fix a chain. You told me I was worth something. I never forgot it. Walter paused, heart thudding softly. He kept reading. I went on to join the Navy, served 12 years. I just retired last year. My mom passed recently, and while cleaning her attic, I found the bike, still working, still holding strong. You built things that lasted, sir, including me. Walter unfolded the blue cloth. Inside was a polished framed medal. Below it, a simple inscription. For Mr. Harper, you're the reason I kept pedaling. Walter's throat tightened. He ran a weathered finger over the glass. The medal wasn't military issued. It was handmade wooden, carved with care. But to Walter, it felt like a national honor. The next Saturday at the garage, Walter shared the story with the kids. He didn't cry. He just smiled softly and showed them the medal. This, he said, wasn't earned in a war or a race. It came from kindness. The kids looked at him with wide eyes. Your famous one whispered. Walter chuckled. No, I'm just noticed. And that's more than I ever expected. Word began to spread beyond the neighborhood. Someone posted about Walter's workshop on a local community page. Then a teacher wrote a blog about him. A local journalist came by and asked for an interview. Walter hesitated. He didn't like fuss, but eventually agreed as long as the kids stayed the focus. The article came out the next week with the headline, The Man Who Fixes Things and the Kids Who Found Their Spark. People started sending tools, notes, even snacks for the workshop. One letter came from another town. Entirely, we don't know you, but we want to start something like your Fix-It Saturdays here. Any tips? Walter smiled as he read it. He scribbled back a short letter. Start with your heart. The rest follows. And yet, despite all the praise, Walter still felt most at peace in his garage, surrounded by sawdust, the hum of conversation, and the clatter of tools in young hands. He never set out to build a legacy. He just fixed a fence. But somehow that simple act had become a movement. And on a quiet Wednesday morning, as he stepped outside with his coffee, there was another box. This one wasn't plain wood. It was painted yellow, with tiny red handprints all over it. Inside a small scrapbook. On the first page, a photo of all the kids standing in front of his garage, holding a banner that read, Thank you, Mr. Harper. You fixed more than wood. Walter sat down on the porch step, coffee forgotten beside him, and turned the pages of the yellow box's scrapbook. Each page was filled with snapshots, pictures of the kids working on projects in his garage, laughing, learning, holding up birdhouses, toolbox kits, crooked little stools. There were hand-drawn thank you notes, taped between the photos, scrawled in crayons and colored markers. Unread Mr. Harper. I didn't know how to use a screwdriver before. Now, I want to build a spaceship. Another said, You fixed my birdhouse, but also my confidence. Thank you. Walter chuckled softly, then paused on a note, written in careful block letters. Dear Mr. Harper, when I grow up, I want to be like you. Not because you know everything, but because you help people and never make them feel dumb. That's the kind of strong I want to be. Walter closed the book, gently holding it to his chest. He hadn't cried in years, not when his knees gave out, not when June passed. But this felt different. He hadn't just taught kids how to use tools. He had given them something he thought he'd lost, a reason to believe they mattered, even if they were quiet, even if they made mistakes. And for the first time in a long time, Walter believed something about himself. He wasn't just getting old. He was still building something meaningful. The following Saturday, something unexpected happened. A woman in her mid-30s showed up at the garage with a boy clinging to her side and a nervous look in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but my dad used to bring me here back when I was little." Walter tilted his head. She pulled out a faded photo. Her maybe age 8, holding a toy sailboat beside a younger Walter. "My dad passed away last year. He always talked about this place, about you." Walter took the photo, studied it, and nodded slowly. "I remember that boat. It wouldn't float right until we got the balance just perfect." She smiled through her tears. "He said you taught him more than how to fix things. You taught him how to pay attention." The boy at her side tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, can I stay?" She looked down at him, hesitating. Walter stepped forward. "We've got extra gloves and an apron." The boy beamed. That afternoon, while the kids worked, Walter stood outside the garage for a moment, watching the late sunlight fall over the yard. From the corner of his eye, he spotted something leaning against the porch. Another box, but this one was different. Taller, thinner, with a glass panel on one side. Inside was a framed photograph Walter and June on their wedding day, young and smiling, sunlight in her hair, and a note taped to the back. She'd be proud. "You kept going. You kept giving. You kept love alive." A friend. Walter felt the ache rise again, but it was a warm ache, the kind that meant something had come full circle. He brought the frame inside and placed it on the mantel. For the first time in years, that space didn't feel empty anymore. The next week started quietly. The kids still came on Saturdays, still asked curious questions, still left with sawdust on their shoes and pride in their eyes. Walter's life had become something he never planned for purposeful again. But on Thursday morning, there was a knock at the door that felt different. It wasn't a neighbor, not someone from the workshop. It was a man in a suit, mid-40s, clean-shaven, holding a leather folder. "Mr. Harper?" the man asked politely. Walter nodded. "That's me. My name is Lewis. I'm with a foundation that supports community mentorship programs. We've been hearing about your workshop." Walter raised an eyebrow. "I didn't start anything official." Lewis smiled. "Sometimes the best things aren't official. They're just real." He opened the folder and handed Walter a letter. Inside was an invitation to speak at a regional youth development conference, to share what he'd been doing in his garage. Walter blinked. "I'm not a speaker." "You don't have to be," Lewis said. "You just have to tell your story. And maybe bring a couple of your kids." Walter looked down at the letter again. He'd fixed fences, not held microphones, but something deep inside him whispered, "Say yes." 2 weeks later, Walter stood backstage in a small auditorium with Emma and 3 other kids from his Saturday group. Emma wore the same denim apron from their first session, now covered in patches and paint stains. Walter looked nervous, fiddling with the corner of his sleeve. Emma tugged on it gently. "You taught us not to be afraid of messing up. Remember?" Walter smiled. "Yeah, guess I should listen to my own advice." They stepped onto the stage. Walter didn't read from a script. He just spoke quietly, simply, about helping a neighbor fix a fence, about the box on his porch, about how he thought his useful days were behind him. And then he said, "I used to think that building things meant hammers and nails, but now I know it can also mean building confidence, building trust, and sometimes building a new beginning." The room fell silent. Then applause. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. A few parents came up afterward, asking how they could start something similar in their own towns. Walter didn't feel like a celebrity. He felt like a seed, something small, that had somehow sprouted into something bigger. That night back at home, he found another box. This one was shaped like a birdhouse. Inside was a note from Emma. "Mr. Harper, we made this at the workshop, but it's not for birds, it's for stories. So you can put a new one inside every week, like you did with us." Walter laughed quietly. Then his eyes softened. He hung the wooden box just outside the garage door. And every Saturday after that, the kids took turns writing down something they learned or fixed or felt. They called it the story house, and before long it was full. As spring turned into summer, Walter's little garage became more than a workshop. It became a hub. More kids came. More parents volunteered. The old garage door never quite closed anymore. It stood open most days, like an invitation to learn to build to belong. And every Saturday, like clockwork, the kids placed their new stories into the wooden story house outside the door. Some stories were short. Today I fixed a chair and didn't give up. Some were funny. I hit my thumb with a hammer 3 times, but I still had fun. Others were unexpectedly deep. This place feels like where I'm supposed to be. I don't feel invisible here. Walter read every one, and he started writing back. Little notes left in their toolboxes, or slipped into aprons, or taped next to their projects. Notes like, "You're braver than you think. Mistakes mean you're trying. I believe in what you're building and in you." He wasn't just teaching carpentry anymore. He was helping kids build confidence, identity, purpose. One morning, Walter received a letter in the mail with an embossed seal. It was from the State Department of Education. He opened it slowly. Inside was a certificate naming Harper's Fix-It Saturdays as an outstanding community mentorship initiative. But it wasn't the certificate that made Walter pause. It was the handwritten note tucked behind it. "Mr. Harper, we were one of the first families you helped back when our son struggled in school. Today he's applying to be an engineer because you believed in him before he believed in himself. Thank you for changing the blueprint of his life." Walter folded the letter carefully and placed it in the story house. He didn't need awards. The real reward had already come, knowing that what he had built quietly, humbly, was rippling out farther than he ever imagined. Later that evening, Danny dropped by with Emma. They carried a larger, heavier box than usual. Walter raised an eyebrow. "Another one." Emma nodded proudly. "Open it." Inside was a custom-made wooden sign, carved in bold letters, painted in blue and gold. "The Harper Workshop for Future Builders." Danny smiled. "We thought it was time the place had a real name." Walter's eyes welled up. He ran his hand across the smooth letters, then looked at Emma. "You did this?" She nodded. "Everyone helped." Walter didn't say much. He just nodded, and finally said, "Let's hang it up together." That night, after the sign was mounted above the garage, Walter sat by the window. The sun was setting, the neighborhood quiet. He looked at his hands, still rough, still strong, and whispered almost to himself, "I thought I was done." He smiled, but maybe I was just getting started. A few months later, on a quiet autumn morning, Walter opened his door and found one last box on the porch. It was small, delicate, tied with a ribbon, but it felt different than the others. Inside, there wasn't a medal or a photo album, just a letter sealed with red wax. Walter took a breath, broke the seal, and began to read. "Dear Mr. Harper, this will be the last box. We wanted you to know something very simple. You didn't just fix fences, you repaired hope. In a time when the world feels rushed and divided, you reminded us that kindness doesn't need permission. That one gentle act can echo for decades. That legacies aren't always loud, they're often built with whispers and wood. You are loved, you are seen, and you are remembered every time a child picks up a tool and believes they can build something new." The letter was unsigned, but Walter knew it didn't need a name, because every single child, parent, neighbor, and stranger who had stepped through his garage door had already said everything that mattered. That weekend, Walter stood outside the garage as the kids arrived, laughing and racing to their workbenches. The new sign, "The Harper Workshop for Future Builders," gleamed above the door. Walter watched them for a while, then turned to Danny, who had become more like a son than a neighbor. "You think this will last?" Walter asked. Danny nodded. "I think it already has." That night, Walter slipped a story into the little wooden story house. Just one line, written in his neat, old-fashioned print. You don't have to be famous to be unforgettable. Just be kind and keep showing up. And with that, the man who once fixed a fence became a builder of hearts, a quiet legend, a reminder to all of us that sometimes the most powerful things we do are the ones we never planned. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment below about someone who made a difference in your life, and share this video with someone who needs hope. We'll see you in the next story right here on Life Plot Twist.